Then her father turned, not to her, but to Lennox, and gripped the mechanic's arm, pulling him to his feet. "This man," Magnus declared to the stunned crowd, "is the heir to my legacy, and Cassidy Hallberg is no longer the princess of this empire. Why her father did this to her? When a spoiled heiress mocks a mechanic's love, her billionaire father shatters her world, forcing her to live, work, and fall for the very man she once humiliated." But before we start the video, let us know where you're watching this video, and if you like this story, don't forget to subscribe Story Store, and please share your thoughts about this story in comment section. The crystal chandeliers trembled as Cassidy Hallberg's laughter rang out, slicing through the grand ballroom of the Silver Crest Hotel. Heads whipped around. Conversations died mid-sentence. Everyone turned to see Cassidy, radiant and ruthless, standing atop the marble staircase like a queen, surveying a court of fools. At the bottom of the steps knelt Lennox Vale, dusty jeans, oil-stained shirt, and a small velvet box trembling in his calloused hand. A mechanic. A nobody. Cassidy let out a high, mocking laugh that echoed cruelly across the polished floors. "You think you can buy your way into this world with a ring, Lennox?" she called down, her voice dripping with disdain. She held up her diamond bracelet, a glittering, obscene thing, and waved it in the air. "This costs more than your entire garage." Ripples of awkward chuckles broke out among the guests, some laughing nervously, others waiting to see where this would go. Cassidy wasn't finished. She sauntered down one step, towering above him. "Did you even wash your hands before touching that box?" she sneered. "Or did you think grease-stained fingers made it authentic?" Lennox's face remained unreadable, but his hand tightened around the velvet box. Around the room, the tension grew sharp enough to draw blood. Cassidy tossed her golden hair and smirked, ready to deliver the final blow. But before she could speak, a sudden, sharp crack split the air. Her champagne flute went flying from her hand, shattering like a gunshot against the marble. Cassidy stumbled back, gasping, clutching her stinging wrist. Silence thundered through the ballroom. Magnus Hallberg stood before her, his palm still half raised, his face carved from stone. His voice, when it came, was low and dangerous. "You disgrace yourself." Cassidy blinked at him, stunned, her cheek burning with more than just shame. "You think you're better than him?" Magnus's voice rose. "Tonight, Cassidy, you learn what true worth looks like." Then Magnus turned, not to her but to Lennox, and gripped the mechanic's arm, pulling him to his feet. "This man," Magnus declared to the stunned crowd, "is the heir to my legacy, and Cassidy Hallberg is no longer the princess of this empire." The room exploded into gasps and whispers. Cassidy stood frozen, the marble staircase spinning beneath her feet. How had everything shattered in a single, brutal moment? 3 months earlier, Lennox Vale had been nothing more than a name on a crumpled invoice. Cassidy's sleek Aston Valora had broken down along a deserted cliff road, stranded in the middle of a thunderstorm. Her frantic calls to luxury services were met with excuses, until a gruff voice from Edgewood's modest garage answered. An hour later, headlights cut through the rain, and out stepped Lennox, dripping wet, sleeves rolled up, grease smudged on his jawline, and a cocky smirk that didn't flinch beneath Cassidy's designer fury. "You look like a movie poster for Rich Girl's Bad Day," he had teased, popping the hood without waiting for her permission. Cassidy had been scandalized. No one spoke to her that way, especially not a mechanic who smelled of motor oil and rain. Yet something in his rugged ease, his blunt honesty, had rattled her carefully built armor. The next morning, instead of calling her usual driver, Cassidy showed up at Edgewood Garage with a strange noise complaint. The week after that, a mysterious oil leak. Each visit chipped away at the polished version of herself she had been taught to display. Lennox never bowed to her status, never pretended she was anything more or less than another broken thing in need of fixing. And against every rule Cassidy had lived by, she found herself waiting for those smirks, those careless, maddening conversations. Maybe, just maybe, something real had started to grow between them. Or, so Cassidy believed. Until tonight. Until he had dared to kneel before her, velvet box trembling, and drag their secret, messy connection into the merciless spotlight of the world she ruled. Or thought she ruled. What Cassidy, and the watching crowd, didn't know was that Lennox's proposal had never been born from love. It had been born from desperation. Months ago, in the shadowed corner of Magnus Hallberg's private study, Lennox had sat across from the man who controlled more than half the city's skyline. The deal Magnus offered was brutal and simple. Win her respect. Win her heart if you can. Remind her what real life tastes like. Magnus wasn't looking for a son-in-law. He was looking for a cure for the glittering arrogance that had consumed his only child. If Lennox succeeded, Magnus would sign over a portion of his vast empire, enough to save Lennox's crumbling garage and the last piece of his late father's dreams. If he failed, everything he loved would be swallowed whole. At first, Lennox had wanted to walk away. He despised the manipulation. He despised being used. But standing on that rain-slick cliff road, watching Cassidy curse the storm while still stubbornly refusing to cry, something inside him had shifted. Maybe, just maybe, she wasn't beyond saving. Maybe, just maybe, he wasn't beyond saving either. So he agreed. But what neither of them had counted on was this. The mechanic and the heiress had started to fall for each other. And love was never part of the deal. The morning after the ballroom disaster, Cassidy Hallberg woke to a world she no longer recognized. Her platinum credit cards? Declined. Her sparkling Aston Valora? Gone. Her private suite in the mansion? Locked. Magnus had left strict orders. Cassidy would live like everyone else now. She was given a modest guest room tucked near the kitchens, the maids instructed to treat her no differently than the staff. News of her downfall spread faster than wildfire among her so-called friends. Invitations dried up. Her phone, once buzzing with shallow admiration, sat silent. Cassidy's humiliation burned hotter than any slap. But Magnus wasn't done. At breakfast, if the stale toast she was given could be called that, he delivered the final blow. "If you want to earn your life back," he said coldly, "you'll start at the bottom, you'll work, you'll learn." And he handed her a single slip of paper, an address, Edgewood Garage. Cassidy laughed, a hollow, disbelieving sound, until she realized he wasn't joking. She would be working under Lennox Vale. The same man she had mocked, humiliated, and dismissed. Her new boss. Cassidy crumpled the paper in her trembling hand, rage and disbelief battling in her chest. This wasn't a punishment, it was a war, and Magnus had just declared it. Edgewood Garage was nothing like the crystal halls Cassidy Hallberg was used to. It stank of oil, metal, and sweat. Engines roared instead of violins. Grease stained everything, even the air. And at the center of it all stood Lennox Vale, arms crossed, smirking like he was about to enjoy every second of her fall. "Welcome to the real world, princess," he said, tossing her a set of grimy overalls. Cassidy stared in horror. No designer clothes, no sparkling heels. Just dirt, tools, and the sharp, watchful eyes of workers who didn't care who she was. Her first day was a series of disasters. She spilled motor oil on a client's shoes, knocked over a tray of wrenches, broke a taillight while trying to help. Each mistake earned a fresh round of laughter from the crew, and another sharp, infuriating smirk from Lennox. At night, Cassidy scrubbed her ruined hands raw, wondering how far she had fallen. And yet, deep beneath the anger and humiliation, something flickered. A strange, stubborn pride. For once, no one was handing her anything. No favors, no fake smiles. Every scratch, every bruise was hers. Cassidy Halberg, the girl who once ruled ballrooms, was learning how to stand, even if she had to do it knee-deep in grease. Just when Cassidy thought she was adjusting to the chaos of Edgewood, a sleek courier arrived at the garage, cutting through the roar of engines and the sting of motor oil. The envelope was heavy, expensive, and cruel. Inside was a wedding invitation. Her ex-boyfriend, Dorian Locke, was marrying her best friend, Faye, at Halberg Vineyards, the place where Cassidy had once imagined her own perfect wedding. The garage seemed to spin. Cassidy stumbled behind the tire racks, clutching the invitation like it had burned her fingers. She slid to the floor, black grease smearing her tears, the taste of betrayal raw on her tongue. When Lennox found her, he didn't tease, he didn't smirk. He simply sat down beside her, silent and solid, letting her cry into the hollow of his chest. For the first time since everything had shattered, Cassidy let herself be vulnerable, ugly, broken, real. Later that night, her voice cracked in the stillness as she whispered, "Why did you even propose to me?" Lennox stiffened. Because if he answered honestly, if he told her about the deal, about Magnus's secret plan, he knew he could lose her forever. And this time, it wouldn't just be business. It would break his heart, too. Cassidy couldn't sleep. The shadows in the garage's office seemed to stretch further the longer she stared at the walls, the silence amplifying the unease gnawing at her. As the clock ticked past midnight, an irresistible pull urged her to explore. She slipped through the office door, the floorboards creaking under her weight. The place smelled faintly of dust and oil, forgotten memories buried beneath layers of grime. Her eyes fell on the cluttered desk, papers stacked in haphazard piles. But it was an old, cracked photo frame that caught her attention. Something about it felt wrong. Curious, Cassidy approached it, her fingers brushing against the glass. As she lifted the frame carefully and froze. It was a photo of Lennox. But there was something even more shocking about it. He was standing beside her father, Magnus Halberg. Younger, less guarded, but unmistakably familiar. Cassidy's heart stopped as the pieces fell into place. The same stern gaze, the same calculated posture. This wasn't just a picture of a mechanic and a tycoon. It was a photo of a bond Cassidy hadn't known existed. She turned to Lennox, the betrayal clear in her eyes. "What is this?" she demanded, voice trembling. Lennox met her gaze, jaw tight. "Ask your father who I really am," he said simply. Cassidy's mind raced, the truth she didn't want to face suddenly crashing in. What game had her father been playing? Cassidy's mind was a whirlwind of questions. What did Lennox mean by his cryptic words? Who was he really? Her stomach churned as she tried to shake off the sense of betrayal. The next day, she couldn't stop herself. She had to know the truth. As dusk fell, Cassidy slipped into her father's study. It felt like trespassing in a place she once thought of as her domain, but tonight, it was different. Tonight, she was the one searching for answers. The door creaked open, and Cassidy descended into the dim basement archives where dusty old files lay forgotten. She sifted through boxes, pulling papers that seemed to hold no meaning until one, yellowed with age, caught her eye. It was a series of documents, personal notes from her father. And there, in black ink, was Lennox's name. Magnus had saved him. Her father had found Lennox, an orphan on the edge of ruin, and paid for his education. The truth hit Cassidy like a punch to the gut. Lennox wasn't just an employee, he was Magnus's project. The young man had been groomed for one purpose: to protect Cassidy from herself. Her world tilted, and a bitter realization burned in her chest. Lennox wasn't the villain. Her father had been. The revelation about her father shattered Cassidy's world. Everything she had known, her life of luxury, her identity, her place in the world, felt like a house of cards collapsing around her. For days, she had sat in the dim corner of the garage, surrounded by oil stains and worn tools, her mind constantly racing. Magnus had manipulated her, used Lennox as a pawn, and controlled her every move. She was a product of his empire, but she wasn't his true heir. She was his experiment, his way of keeping her tethered to the world he had built. But Lennox had given her something she hadn't realized she needed: a choice. It was late one night, after another endless day of wrenching and fixing engines, when Cassidy found herself standing before Lennox. His face was set, unreadable, but there was something softer in his eyes now, a flicker of trust, a hint of something more. "I'm not your father's puppet," she said, the words tasting like freedom on her tongue. "I'm not going to let him control me anymore." Lennox didn't say anything at first. He just nodded, as if he had been waiting for her to see it. Cassidy made her choice. She would build her own life, free from her father's shadow. And with that, her true journey began. Magnus Hallberg's final breath was rattling in the sterile silence of his private hospital room. The once commanding tycoon, reduced to frailty, lay in a bed that seemed too small for the giant of a man he once was. Cassidy stood at the foot of the bed, her heart pounding in her chest. Lennox, standing beside her, was unreadable, his usual smirk replaced by a solemnity she had never seen before. Magnus's voice, weak but steady, broke the silence. "Don't build your life on my ashes, Cassidy," he rasped. His words struck like a sharp blade, but there was no anger in his tone, only a strange peace. Cassidy blinked, confused, as he continued. "Build it on your own foundation. You're not meant to be a shadow of my empire. You're meant for more." Turning to Lennox, Magnus's gaze softened. "And you," he whispered, "you're free. No more deals, no more promises. You were never my pawn." With trembling hands, Magnus tore up the contract he had once forced Lennox to sign, the deal that had bound him to this family. Cassidy watched in disbelief as her father's empire crumbled into nothingness. Magnus had chosen to leave it all behind, giving his final gift not of wealth, but of freedom. After her father's funeral, Cassidy returned to the Silvercrest mansion, but it no longer felt like home. The towering walls seemed to close in on her, each room echoing with memories she no longer wanted to keep. The house was too empty, too grand, and too full of lies. It had been her prison, her symbol of power, but now it felt suffocating. She packed her bags quietly, leaving behind the riches, the luxury, and the expectations that had once defined her. This place was a reminder of a life she had been forced into, and it no longer held any appeal. As Cassidy stepped outside, a figure stood waiting at the gate. It was Lennox. He didn't come with a car, didn't offer promises or grand gestures. He simply stood there, a silent offer of something real. He extended his hand, not as a mechanic, not as someone bound by obligation, but as a man who understood her. Cassidy hesitated for a moment, the weight of everything pressing on her shoulders. Then, slowly, she took his hand, feeling the warmth of something genuine for the first time in years. And in that moment, she chose to step into a new life, her own. Months passed, and Edgewood had a new garage. The old dusty place that once felt like an alien world to Cassidy had transformed into something vibrant, something alive. Vale and Halberg Automotive Solutions was born, a partnership not of convenience but of choice. Cassidy now worked the front desk, greeting customers with a smile that felt real. Sometimes she'd slip behind the counter and help with repairs, her hands getting dirty but no longer caring. She had found a sense of purpose here, among the grease and the grit, with Lennox by her side. Lennox, too, had changed. He wasn't the mechanic with a hidden agenda anymore. He was her partner, someone she could trust. And one quiet evening, as the sun dipped low and the garage hummed with the soft sounds of work, Lennox did something he had once sworn he wouldn't. He proposed again. But this time, it wasn't in a ballroom, surrounded by wealth and expectations. It wasn't with a velvet box or a sparkling diamond. It was with a simple, handmade gear pendant, rough around the edges, just like their journey. Cassidy cried, not from the weight of pressure or manipulation, but from the raw, unspoken promise of a love built on truth. And this time, it was real.